Hi there and welcome. My name is Michael Kentenich and I'm a Microsoft Technical Trainer. In this video, we will find out how we can fine-tune our app's environment, language runtimes, and resource allocation. App Service is a powerful way to host your applications. Depending on the use case, you might want to host the same code or image on different instances of Azure App Services, for example, in different geographies. There's a good chance that you need each instance to be configured slightly differently. The connection string used to connect to the database or other external services will be a bit different for each instance. Logging or runtime settings might need different values set for each instance as well. In this unit, we will go over creating application settings that are bound to deployment slots, and then explain the options for installing TLS certificates for your application. In Azure App Service, certain settings are available to the deployment or runtime as environment variables. Some of these settings can be customized when you set them manually as app settings. Of course, you can have app settings in configuration files depending on the language framework you use, and these files can be deployed to the app services with the rest of the code in the file system. The app settings you configure for the app service resource in Azure will override the ones in the config files, which gives you some more flexibility since you can change values without the need for redeployment. Next up, I will walk you through the configuration of these application settings in a demo. In this video, I will show you how to configure an app service, or more specific, a web app. I have a web app here already, and I would like to provide some environment variables, some application settings that my code needs to be able to read from that instance of a web app. So to do this, I will go in the left-hand side and look for the settings node and then select environment variables. That will get me access to app settings and connection strings. There's some app settings already in here. There's a no default version already configured by the platform, and I have provided a specific app version in here. I can look at the specific values that I've provided. Those are not secrets. They will be exposed in log files and so on, but of course it's nice that it's not just exposed in the portal right away. If you want to keep them secure, you should use a key vault, for example. If I want to add something, I can just add a server in here or any other value. This is completely up to me, and I will just provide a value and then go ahead, apply these settings. Sometimes, and depending on what platform you're using, that app service will be restarted. So there might be a small timeout or delay before it becomes available again. Now, obviously, when you have a lot of different settings to configure, then this UI is not really super comfortable. So there you could choose the advanced edit mode. With this, I get a JSON document that shows me all the different names and its values, and I can edit this from here as well. Sure, I can also copy paste this from some other instances over and make my life a bit easier. The same goes for connection strings. If I have certain connections to databases or other services, I can place them in here. There's a list of certain predefined types that I can pick, so it knows what are we using this for, like a SQL Server or a service bus or a document DB that you have in here. And then you just use whatever you want to provide. You give it a name. You could use this like a MySQL connection here as well, and then provide a value. I don't have a value right now, and usually we don't type this ourselves. We just copy this over from an instance that we have around. If you would like to use such a connection string or an app setting only for that specific slot that we are configuring right now, which in this case is the production slot, I could enable this checkbox here, which makes it only available for this slot. If I would swap that slot at some point to a staging slot, I would have not this value here following. It will stay with the production slot. And then I just go ahead and apply this again. That's the first part of configuration, where I can set app settings and connection strings. There's the second part where we have all the configuration pieces that are specific to the instance. Let me show you what I mean by this. So you go to configuration, still under settings, and in here, it will open up different tabs, general settings, default documents, and so on. On general settings, I can change a lot of those decisions that I made when I created that web app. So I can change the stack. If I want to now host a Python application in here instead of .NET, I can go ahead and change this. If I want to use a different version of .NET or ASP.NET, I can change this too. The same goes for the so-called bitness, if it's 32 or 64-bit application. And obviously, all these settings have to reflect really what the application needs or what kind of application it is. Then you have other settings that are important maybe for operating this specific instance of a web app. Let's just call out a few. The WebSockets, you can enable or disable this. If it's enabled, then it allows your application to use WebSockets, if it's a chat application, for example. If you don't need it, then just keep it disabled because it will save you some resources. Always on is a nice feature that when you enable this, your app stays warmed up. It reduces the startup times for users. It's especially useful for apps with long initialization processes or background tasks. If you have any kind of user login session or in general sessions that will keep local data for each request locally, then you might want to enable, or it is enabled by default, the session affinity. If your app has multiple instances for scalability reasons, then a session affinity or session stickiness ensures that a user's subsequent requests go to the same instance where it started. So that's super helpful. If we scroll down a bit, we also see that I can enable remote debugging. Super helpful if you are a Visual Studio user and you have your app running on Azure already and you would like to attach your Visual Studio version to that app so you can remote debug this and see all the details that you normally could also see if you do this on a local system. And last but not least, on this side here, if your app requires client certificate for securing the communication, you would configure this mode where the options include ignore, which is the default, accept, which is optional, and we can also set it to require. So it's mandatory using a certificate for client authentication. On the other tab, default documents, for example, here I can configure when a user visits your website's root. So for example, contoso.com, the server looks for default documents like the index HTML or a default ASPX or any of the other files that you see in here. And you can configure these here to ensure very smooth user experience. So those files are found right away and mapped to a specific path. We have path mappings where we can set handler mappings. Handler mappings are important if I have different files that need to be handled differently by the server. I can specify here the file type and what, for example, script processor I'm using to handle those. And virtual applications and directories, that is where suppose you have a main app and an API with the same Azure App Service, and you create a virtual application for the API, allowing it to run independently. Directories can represent different sections of your app, like you could have a /admin, a /API pointing to specific path in your file system or in the file system of this web service. And of course, or it's still on preview right now, but I could also configure some error pages in here. So let's say that we see, or the users, if they run into some errors, I have specific predefined error pages. But as you can see, this is still in preview yet. Your company wants you to protect the data that is sent between the apps and the customers. Azure App Service has the tools that allow you to make, upload, or bring in a private certificate or a public certificate into App Service. When an app uploads a certificate, it keeps it in a deployment unit that is linked to the combination of the App Services Plan resource group and region. We call that internally a web space. And this lets other apps in the same resource group and region access the certificate too. You have a few options for adding certificates. You can add a free App Service managed certificate. That's a private certificate that's free of charge and simple to use if you only need to protect your custom domain in Azure App Service. You can buy an App Service certificate. That's a private certificate that's handled by Azure for you. It offers the ease of automated certificate management and the flexibility of renewal and export options. You can import a certificate from Key Vault if you use Azure Key Vault already to manage your certificates. If you already have a private certificate from a third-party provider, you can upload it too. And additionally, you can upload a public certificate, and these are not used to secure custom domains, but you can load them into your code if you need them to access remote resources. In this video, you have learned the art of managing application settings, securing web traffic with SSL, TLS certificates, and optimizing app features. With these skills, you are equipped to streamline your app's functionality and security, ensuring smooth transactions and enhanced user experiences. Take charge of your app's configuration and security today with Azure App Service. Thanks for watching. Keep on learning.